Hey, it's Yazuki Wolf, and welcome to another devlog for The Arena, a turn-based old-school combat game that we've been working on for a little while. And in our last devlog, we talked about setting up a system for ranged combat, and you'll see here now if I press play, everything should be working properly. I can move my character around, and if I press R to switch to ranged, and now hit the direction toward that little crab there, you'll notice that there's a little red dot that shoots out and hits the crab. That red dot is basically just the hitbox that we were setting up in the last video. In the future, I may put a different sprite to make it a little bit more cool or more interesting, depending on what the sort of type of attack you're using is. But I think for our current implementation, that's more than enough. And as we talked about in the last video, the player's attack damage value is being sent to that hitbox, and that hitbox is in turn sending that damage to the target of whatever is hit. And so if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice that there is a red health bar that's indicating the amount of health that the crab that I hit has. And if I attack him again, it should, I think, either kill him. Yeah, it killed him. And if we go to the next guy, it probably will just lower his health. So it looks like these crabs take 2 hits. I wonder how many hits the worm takes. Another little update here that you can see in the top of the screen here. We actually have a text box that updates with information. So you see here the wormy clone takes 2 damage, wormy clone takes 2 damage, wormy clone dies. So we can actually see specifically how much damage we're doing and make sure that all the attack values are correct through this text box. Now the clone thing there, that's because wormy is a prefab. That's like a prefab is a term in Unity for something that is made to be able to be spawned numerous times. It's not just one instance of it. And so the true wormy exists outside of the game. And so anytime I put him into the game, it's going to be a clone of him. And as I have the text set up right now, it's just looking at the Unity name. So I may have to think of a way to delete that clone from that description. Maybe right when he's spawned into the game, I'll rename him or something. But that's a problem for another day. It's not super high priority right now. So this is a bit of a quick review, but this is essentially the system that we set up last time. We have our attacker, and we have a hitbox, and the hitbox is carrying a damage value. And that damage value is then being sent to the target whenever a collision is detected. That is to say that if this hitbox runs into the collider that's attached to the player or the enemy or whatever target is available, then that damage number will then be sent to that target. But the thing is, we want this value to be a little bit more dynamic than that. I think last time the initial setup was that the attacker would have an attack value, and that attack value would then be sent over to the hitbox, which would then send that over to the target. I've expanded upon that now, though, so that the attacker, I mean, essentially it's the same thing, but instead of it just being a static number here, this number is actually based on the target's stats. So they'll have, say, a strength stat and a dexterity stat. And let's just say this dexterity is, the strength is 2 and the dexterity is 1 maybe. And they're also going to have equipment. So they're going to have armor. They're going to have weapons, whether those be melee weapons or ranged weapons. And they'll also have other various items. And this equipment also will have stats. So, for example, if we are doing a melee attack, we are now going to look at the attacker's strength, and we're going to add anything he might also be getting from, say, like a melee weapon to that. So say he has a sword that has a +1, that'd be 2 + 1, so there's a value of 3, which will then be sent over here, and it does 3 damage. So the result is the same, but now it's actually more of a dynamic system. We also have, for ranged attack, instead of taking it from the strength, we're going to be taking it from dex. So we'll say maybe dex is going to be this 1 from dex plus whatever he gets from this ranged weapon. And let's just say that that's 1 + 1. And so maybe this is going to be 2 damage for ranged attack. So the ranged attack is going to do 2 damage. So coming back here to Unity, you'll notice that in the grid, we have our player. If I click on player, we then go over to the inspector to see all the different components that are attached to our player. And you'll see a whole bunch of scripts here now. I actually decided to split up a lot of the functionality we had before into more compartmentalized scripts. So the first script here you see is something called an actor script. And so essentially, instead of making like a player script and an enemy script, I decided to just make a more generic actor script. And the actor script is essentially the character stats. So if we open this up, you'll notice that we have base stats. We have a strength, a dexterity, and a health. This player has a strength of 2, his dexterity is 0, his health is 12, and all this can be edited right here in Unity, so I can make various different types of players and various different types of enemies as well. And then underneath that we have this list of equipment slots. And it's actually an array if you're familiar with the terminology, but essentially what that is just a list of 4 items, and these 4 items are just slots of equipment that can be added to the player or enemies as well. Actually, this is not specifically for the player. And all these pieces of equipment are what we call scriptable objects. So if I click on here, it will open up this equipment folder that I have set up here in the Unity project. And within this folder, you'll see I have like a hard shell, I have protective robe, staff of law, test equipment number 3, crest number 4, worm spit. That's obviously for the enemy character. But essentially each one of these are objects only existing in script form. And so if I click on it, I have these weapon stats, this melee damage modifier, range damage modifier, 2-hit modifier, attack range, armor stats, physical resistance, magical resistance, and so forth. And these all can be edited right here in Unity, which makes it really easy to adjust the game's balance and make new weapons without having to go into the hard code every time. Even on the top here, we have an image section. So right now, you'll see all the images are just blank white squares, but in the future, if we have actually images for the different types of equipment, we can put that in this. We can plug that into here, and it should automatically update with that image. We also have the equipment types. We have melee, ranged, armor, and item. All right, so if we click back on the player and go back to the inspector, once again, you'll see here in the equipment, we have the staff of law. We also have protective robe. And so what these are doing is they're actually adding stats. You'll notice down below the equipment, we have these kind of grayed out stats down here. These are grayed out because these are, I guess you could call them secondary stats. These are things that we don't input directly, but they are derived from the stats above. So we have melee damage from equipment, range damage from equipment, and all these other stats that are being derived from the equipment he has. And then it has the finalized stats. That's going to be the final stats. That's going to be the final stat, which is calculated from his base stats and his equipment stats. Right now, they're all 0 because it updates on play. So, for example, for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and take off all his equipment. So I'm going to turn that to none. This one's also going to be none, so he has no equipment on. If I press play, Unity's updating, and right after all the enemies spawn, we see that the finalized stat for his melee damage is 2, and that's taken directly from his strength. So strength of 2 means that he has 2 melee damage. Dexterity of 0 means that he has absolutely no range damage. That's 0. And his health is 12, which comes down here to mean that his current health is 12 in the finalized stat. He gets nothing from the equipment. But now, if we go back and give him that hard shell and the staff of law, and let's just look real quick at the stats of those. So Staff of Law gives a ranged damage modifier of 2. So this is kind of a ranged attack weapon. And the Hard Shell is giving 1 health. That doesn't seem like much. Let's make that 10 health, just to be a little bit better. And we'll say it gives you extra 5 physical resistance. So now if we go back to our player and hit play, you'll notice that in the finalized stat for melee damage, he has 2. So this value of 2 here is being carried straight over to his melee attack. His range damage is 2. He has no dexterity, but he is getting 2 points from the Staff of the Law. He then has a physical resistance of 7. We only put 5 for the hard shell, so that's giving him the 5 from the hard shell, and then he's also getting 2 added to that as well from his strength stat. Then in the current health, he has 22 because we have his base stat health is 12, but then he's getting an extra 10 from the hard shell, which gives him 22 health total. So that was sort of the first layer of what we added to this system. There's one other thing though, and that is that these base stats up here, these are not going to be static because our character is going to level up. And when he levels up, these stats are going to grow. So maybe at level 2, his strength turns into 5 and his dex turns into 2, or however we decide to have them level. So the next thing we had to add was a leveling system. Now, there's not so much in terms of the mechanics of this. It's just simply a matter of changing these values on level up. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But the idea of having them level up was actually quite interesting because I used a new system here. If we look back here at the scripts here, at the very bottom, we see we have our leveling script. And I decided to use a curve. This is an inbuilt Unity I guess, feature where you can create these curves. And this is so nice because before I knew about curves, when I was thinking about having a character level up, I was thinking, okay, so there's a number of ways we can do this. One way is we can say that at level 1, the character needs 100 XP, right? At level 2, he needs 200 XP. We could go down the list. But then you don't want this to be too linear, so maybe you might say, all right, at level 5, instead of it being 500, let's make it 510. And at level 6, let's make it 620. And then level 7, it's going to be 730. And we can just keep kind of increasing the values bit by bit as we go. But this would essentially require me to make this whole graph where I store all these values in here and have the computer look up okay, they're at level 5 right now, where it would look up the entry for level 5 and then say, okay, level 5 has a value of 510, so then we have to get 510 to get that level. And it's just a lot of manual input that could take up a lot of time, especially if you decide later on that, wait, these values are no good at all, and actually we need to make this bump up a lot more than just by 10. Maybe this should be, maybe it shouldn't be 510, maybe it should be 550. And now we have to spend however long to figure out what the rest of this is going to be with that new balance, right? The other thing you could do is you could say, okay, I'm going to simplify this and just make a math equation. So let's say that instead of making a whole graph here, I'm just going to say that the next level, and we'll just say n, so maybe that's the next level that you want, and the experience that you need to get to that level is going to be L. We'll say that L is your current level times 100 XP. And then to stop it from being too linear, we'll say that we'll add, maybe say every 5 levels. So level divided by 5, we'll add another 10 XP. And then maybe later on you'll be like, oh, that's not quite good enough. So we'll say that on top of that, we'll also say that plus level divided by 25 will add another 25, maybe another 100 XP or something like that. And you just keep adding all these different equations, and you kind of rework stuff over and over again to try to get the right balance. That is so much easier when you have something like this that you can just say, I want it to go like this. I want it to be easy at the beginning, and at the end it gets hard. And maybe later on I'll play the game and I'll realize that, well, this is way too big, too steep of a curve right here. Well, that's not a big deal. I can just take this and drag it up and maybe make something a little bit less of a severe curve. And there you go. And you might be asking why I don't just bring this top value down. Well, it's because the top value actually has to be at 1. The reason for that is that this 0 represents level 0, right? But the 1 here represents the max level, whatever that may be. So there's 2 values that I plug into this, and that's one is the max level. That's the highest level I want a player to be able to achieve in the game. And the next is XP at max level, and that's how much XP I want it to take to get that final level. And then based on those 2 values, it then calculates what all the levels in between should be based on this graph. So yeah, a lot of nerdy stuff this devlog. It's just a lot of numbers, not a whole lot of action, but hopefully you found it interesting, and hopefully you can use it in your own game design and game dev adventures. So until next time, live boldly and be creative. Yoroshiku! Why is Krabby not dying? Oh crap, yeah, the hard shell was Krabby's hard shell. And I just increased it from 1 to 10. That's why he's not dying. Oops. Might have to edit that later.